Hi, I am Damien Marie AtHope, and I am an axiological atheist. I am also against hereditary religion. This is the 7th annual International Day of Protest against religion. Well, I mean against hereditary religion. And I oppose is the force of hereditary religion. So, in this section, what I want to deal with is the child's religious freedom rights violations. And a scholarly study generally focuses children's rights by identifying them with individual rights. The following rights allow children to grow up healthy and free: freedom of speech, freedom of thought, freedom from fear, freedom of choice, and the right to make decisions. And lastly, and should be of course first, is ownership over one's body. And to me this would include one's mind, one's right to make one's own free choice of belief. And of course in this thing particularly it refers to religious freedom, or actually children's religious freedom, and how that doesn't mean an extension of just adults' religious freedom, as such as parent or a guardian who is actually taking care of a child, but the actual child's individual, removed from the greater group of family or of parents, their personal right, their ownership over their own mind. So, children, and I'm going to read a section from an article. So, children's rights are human rights. The rights of children, with particular attentions to the rights of special protection and what can be afforded to minors. The 1989 Convention on Rights of the Child defines a child as any human being below the age of 18 years, unless under the law applicable to a child, a minority attained in this way. Children's rights include their right to association with both parents, human identity, as well as basic needs for physical protection, food, universal, other things that come with like care and the universal well-being of the child in general. And it may involve state paid education, health care, criminal laws, whatever. But it also should involve the rights to develop. And this means develop their own beliefs, develop their own self, their own individuality. Equal protection for these child's civil rights. And the freedom from discrimination of this based on the child's race, gender, sexual orientation, gender identity, national orientation, their choice of religion, their disability, their color, ethnicity, whatever, any other characteristics. So interpretation of child's rights, though, range from allowing children the capacity for autonomous action to the enforcement of children being physically, mentally, and emotionally free from abuse. Though what constitutes abuse to some is a matter of debate. Other definitions include rights to care and nurturing. And I think that thinking of care and nurturing, of course, is things for the child's well-being. So this also should be that the parents wish to promote the child's free association with their own beliefs. And they should be nurturing them to be their own thinkers. And if they can think on their own and they choose the parent's belief, well then they've chosen the belief. It doesn't have to be something that's forced on them. Going back to the thing, so as children themselves cannot fully know the laws of the world, nor can they fully understand elements at all stages of development, the ideas and concepts in a religion to fully form a belief. And thus, to me, their rights should be respected to not, give them or expect more from them than they can rightly, adjust to or understand. I think it's really respecting their individuality and their freedom. Instead, their adult caretakers, including parents, social workers, teachers, youth workers, and others, have an vested authority, but this is depending on circumstances. And to me, it should always be towards the child's well-being, towards the child's development of their rights and freedoms, such as choosing what they choose to believe or not believe. So, and one person also has gone so far to describe that legal machinery applies to children as repressive state, appendages. Structures such as government policies have been held by some contributors to mask the ways adults abuse and exploit children, resulting in things like child poverty, lack of education opportunities, child labor. And some of these issues address under religion, that some children are not given, access to science education. And so to me, you're affecting their lack of educational opportunities. So one view is that children are to be regarded as a minority group towards whom society needs to reconsider the ways that it behaves. Researchers have identified children as needing to be recognized as participants in society, whose rights and responsibilities need to be recognized at all ages to the level of the child's understanding. So there's a real problem because to me now we have, this hereditary religion that completely is allowed to violate, the rights of children. And so I'm going to read you a thing. There is a, and this was written in 1997. There is a mass of human rights law, both treaty and soft law, both general and child-specific, which recognizes the distinct status and particular requirements of children. Children, owing to their particular vulnerability and their significance as a future generation, are entitled to special treatment, generally and in situations of danger. To priority, it is the recipient of this assistance and protection. And that was from the International Law Concerning Child Civilians in Armed Conflict. But I think that in general, it should be just a basic general kind of a thing that we are desiring. And this should include religious. I am for religious freedom as much as I am from the freedom from religion. And so for the religious freedom, really, I support this. But to me, this is all citizens should be having religious freedom. And this includes your children. They're not just extension of your religious right. They have to be their own people. They recognize their own human rights. And that includes their right to choice. So this is something from 1760s. So, but it still is prevalent, that understanding that there's always been a long history of understanding that the parent's position is, that I think religious kind of forget. Parental powers. This is from the 1760s. Parent, because it should be parents, parent are given sufficient power to fulfill their duties to the child. And this was in Blackstone's Commentaries on the Laws of England, Book 1, Chapter 16. So, according to a title called The Child's Rights to Religion, Religious Education as a Human Right, published in Human Rights and Religion in Education Context, pages 161 to 170, stated, although most people are quite aware of it, religious education is a human right. The United Nations Universal Declarations of Human Rights in 1948 stated in Article 26 the right of parents to choose the kind of education that shall be given to their child or children. And then after having stated that, education shall promote understanding, tolerance, friendship among nations, racial and or religious groups. So your promotion of education has to be part of it. Should be, they're saying, tolerance, friendship among all nations, racial groups, or religious groups. So if you're teaching, to hate other nations, then you're violating this. If you're teaching to hate other races, you're violating this. If you're teaching to hate other religions, you're violating this. And this would include teaching you to hate people that have no religion, like an atheist. Teaching your children to hate atheists is also a violation of your duties as a parent, which again implies religious education might be in violation of the United Nations, because it does have some religious education, and I'm not saying all, especially fanaticism, but not all, do have stuff that is going against some other, groups, especially other religious groups. Moreover, religious education can be understood as part of the freedom of thought, the freedom of conscience, and the freedom of religion for the child, guaranteed in Article 18 as a basic human right. So, to violate this would be a violation of human rights. Since these articles refer to parents' rights and duties in the first place, the question of child's or children's rights to religion is more open. And to me, this is what we should be focusing on. We really should come up with some more, articles that clarify and establish the child's right to religious thought, free of the parents. Okay, and then the most pertinent part of the document stated that the United Nations Conventions on Rights to the Child in 1989 included the reference to the right, but these references cannot be considered fully satisfactory from an education point of view. According to that article that explains and considers the legal situation, especially from the perspective of religious education and in the light of inter-religious or non-religious education, that there is a clear need for further developing of the understanding of the children's or child's religious rights in a multi-religious context and via the challenges of inter-religious education, as well as the child's right to choose or not choose faith of one kind or another. All lovers of true thinking freedom should oppose the force of hereditary religion. If religion is about what is true, why do so many feel a need to force it? Freedom of religion should not be the freedom to coerce or the freedom of coercive hereditary religion, as if it has some rights over human rights. Ideas are not people. Ideas do not have rights. Ideas do not have feelings. Ideas do not have a dignity to violate. People have rights. People deserve freedoms. People have a right to exist. People have a dignity that we should respect. And that includes children and their right to choose or not choose a religion. And that also means waiting till they are old enough to understand that choice. I am all for letting kids decide their stance on religion for themselves. I'm an atheist, but I'm not against anyone choosing. And as children can't think without magical explanations until around 7 years old, I feel that the United Nations should make an article that addresses this. That the violations of a child are too important to protect against. That their free choice cannot possibly happen at a 3-year-old cannot make a choice for their religion. A 4-year-old should not be held accountable for a choice they make of what they think a religion would be or not be. To me, it logically, though, should not or must not be pushed on them until they are old enough to understand. I would like this age to be 18, but I understand that before that they have the right to freely choose. But it should be actually that they choose to freely decide, or at least after researching, say as a teenager, they can come to some choice when they fully understand. As it's a standard in the 26th Amendment of the United States Constitution, which prohibits states and federal government from denying the rights to vote. One is a citizen and reaches the age of 18. I think that both issues of age and intellectual consent. See, we wait to have people vote because we want to know that they have intellectual consent and that they have intellectual capacities at a level of reason that can critically think, at least to a certain point, about their rights and choices. And to me, belief should be just as important, especially if religious people believe that the choice they're making is a, life and death choice, pretty much, because they believe the afterlife has heaven or hell, then they believe this choice is an important choice. Then it should be a choice when they can understand the choice. So, moreover, in the United States, freedom of religion is a constitutionally protected right, provided in the religion cause under the First Amendment. So to not give the child rights is actually a violation of the First Amendment. Are we saying a child is not a citizen? And if we say that they can't make a choice, then why are we allowing them to be forced? Why do we accept in society hereditary religion as if it is normal? So, to religious, civil liberties are guaranteed by the First Amendment. And it is being violated when a parent is using forced indoctrination on a child, removing the child's right to freely choose or choose to not have a religion at all. as should be guaranteed them as a human being or as an American citizen of the United States. And generally speaking, by being born in the United States or one of its territories, the acquisition of citizenship has occurred. Thus, one has a legal right to citizen at birth in the United States. Thus, the equal rights should be afforded them, and they are deserved from birth, not after one leaves one's parents as a youth or a young adult after 18. Thus, to me, this addresses the harm of hereditary religion and shows that coercive hereditary religion is most often an expression of a rights violation against the children, against the child's right of freedom of religion, of freedom of thought, of freedom of expression. Remember, these children have an equal birthright to citizenship and the rights that come with citizenship involved under the religion clause of the First Amendment, just as the parents have, and all people should have, and would if they were also citizens of the United States, or as I believe should be afforded just humans in general, right to their own selves, their own bodies, their own minds. However, I believe this or similar standard was sort of adopted all over the world, and not just limited to the United States. There would be real change. And the biggest change, no matter if the religion stayed the same, is it would for the first time have a more basis in actual belief and not just an acceptance of some person in power telling a weaker person without knowledge, this is what you should believe. This is your religion. This is our religion. Now you have to believe like me. Freedom of religion and the First Amendment freedom of speech are very important. And they do address this issue of child's rights violation by hereditary religion. According to a study of the global research landscape by the Pew Research Center, nearly 3/4, 73% of the world's religious people live in countries in which their religious group makes up the majority population. So, this would demonstrate how religious persuasion, belief, is more likely a connection to one accepted attributes of hereditary religion, rather than a matter of choice or any kind of thinking freedom that is based upon some valid and reliable justification for what one believes is true, after they've given a chance to think about it as an adult. Now, some people will say, well, I became religious as an adult, so thus I had freedom. Well, good. Then you should afford that freedom and believe that that freedom of choice is also afforded to everyone, and this would include children. I really feel that, it's not a matter of me, trying to force religion to end. I want to force freedom to begin. It's very important to understand that there has to be free choice. And to me, a great majority of why we have religions can largely be attributed mainly to not the truth or power of the religion, but to their force. and hereditary religion. That's someone in power forcing their religion on a child. Why hereditary religion does so well and how religion does so well in the world is there's a connection of these two. I wish for free choice, free thinking, including if one chooses to have a religion. I wish it to be a free choice, and I would never remove that choice from another person, even if they believe things I do not believe. So the world all over is victimized by this hereditary religion, which is learned and then forced again and again, offered as some sort of, wonderful tradition. Yeah, this tradition of authority bias, the illusion of truth effect, or tradition is real good at the status quo bias. And the hereditary religion, starting so young, is not about truth. The child can't think, they only can accept. But what they're trying for is anchoring bias and a confirmation bias, so that in the future they'll have this starting point where magic has to be true, God has to be real, to where somehow the world has to then debunk this thing that they believed with no evidence at all, no proof at all, just assertions and accepted belief. Then what happens, because they have this hereditary religion, they end up with this belief that was never theirs, that they never thought about, that they just accepted from the moment hearing it, without ever even questioning. They end up with the post-purchase rationalization. I'm going to go ahead and read what those biases mean so that it can be fully understood. Number one is authority bias. The tendency to attribute greater accuracy to the opinions of an authority figure, unrelated to its context, and more influenced by that opinion. So, in other words, this has to be like, well, because it's in the Bible, well, then it has to be an accuracy. Because it's in the Bible, it has to have authority. And because authority bias also is happening, because the parent is the authority, the person who is the caregiver, or is the one that's watching the child in there somehow, that they are the ones, in a sense, in authority. When they're put in this authority, the child has a bias, authority bias, that they attribute, a greater accuracy to the opinions of these authority figures, like parents. So if you can get the child to already believe before they can think, the authority bias works real well. The illusion of truth effect is that people are more likely to identify as true statements those that they have previously heard, which is why get them young, program them, just give a bunch of stuff. They keep hearing it over and over again. God is true. God is love. I feel God. You feel God. There's a God. Everyone praise God. Love God. Power. You start to be programmed to think that this word that you don't even really can explain, that it has a reality value, that it has a substance, that somehow it is real. And you become so sure of this. But some of that is the illusion of truth effect, that people are more likely to identify things as true statements, those that they have previously heard, even if they cannot convincingly remember having heard them, or even to their truth value. Regardless of the actual validity of the statement, they simply, because they heard it before multiple times, think it has somehow a higher truth value. In other words, a person is more likely to believe a familiar statement than an unfamiliar one. and this is regardless of its truth that can be proven. The next is status quo bias. This is the tendency to like things to stay relatively the same. So this also is real important, because if everyone in the family believes, well, then I have to believe. That doesn't mean it's true. Well, we've always believed. Our family has always been Muslim, Christian, Jewish, Buddhist, whatever, shamanist. So then there's, right, the status quo bias. We want to be like them. We want to have this tendency, to keep things the same. In fact, even some people that are raised in religions that are not that, are raised with a lower amount of religion, sometimes go on their own and look back to what the status quo of the family was before and go heavier back into the previous religion. So, there's a real tendency for to make things, the status quo, to keep them the same. This is bias, and this is something that, they'll promote, in a hereditary, religious context. It's not about truth. It is about manipulation. And so, to me, that's not to mean that I'm saying that a person who's doing hereditary religion understands the biases, the effects. I'm saying they're employing things that utilize or interact with these biases, or inspire these biases. The anchoring bias. This is the tendency to rely too heavily on the first piece of information offered, the anchor. In other words, this is like when you're a child and you're offered that God is real. And you go, yeah. And you anchor in on that everything else then has to somehow, make sense to that idea. So the tendency to rely too heavily on the first piece of information offered, the anchor. When making decisions, and anchoring also occurs when individuals use an initial piece of information to make subsequent judgments. Once again, like I said, you're told God is real. And so every other idea that comes in, you're going to look at through the glasses that God has to be real. And so anything like you're shown that there's a possibility God is not real, or that God is impossible, or that God is contradictory, or that, can you please explain God, because I don't know what you're talking about. People, will say God is, this attribute, that attribute. Yeah, but those are attributes. What is the thing you're talking about? What is God? To me, people really don't even, if I ask you, what is God? And you need to explain as a thing, what is this thing you're talking about? You're talking about a non-reality thing. Because if you're talking about a reality thing, then explain it. So, going on about the anchoring bias, for example, the initial piece of information offered for a religion sets the standard for the rest of the negotiations of thought. So that piece lower than the initial, we need to understand that it has to do with lower and higher worth. So once you have this anchoring thing of this God value idea, its worth is placed at a higher set, because it's in the anchoring, the first piece, the first thought of what reality conceives of, that it has to have God. Then everything else is given a lower value. So if you say, well, evolution, debunks God, well, that's a lower value. So even if that was true, its ability to remove the first anchor, the higher value thing, like the belief that there just has to be a God, that belief will supersede all other beliefs because it's perceived as a higher value. And that has to do with axiology. So we need to really see its real worth. Imagine if you're looking at a car and you need to know the difference between a high price and a lower price car. They're all cars. Ideas, in a sense, being the same as a car. An idea, but just giving it a fake worth, like the term that there has to be a God. Giving it a fake worth. What I mean by that is its truth value has not been assessed, right? But it's being, because what is there to assess? If you assess, well, how true is a God? Well, what is a God? Well, God is something supernatural, even if someone says that. Okay, the word supernatural, you mean like something non-natural. You mean like something non-real, or not in reality, or something beyond reality. Or the simplest explanation of that is magic. But since there's no magic evident in the world in any way and in any scientific test ever in the history of science, it is logical to presume that there is nothing magic, at least evident. And thus the question of a God would seem to be almost minute to nothing, just off that fact alone. So to me, to posit that it has a truth value or a reality worth of a high status like the anchor does, it shows it actually was invalid to begin with. It was never a reality worth belief. But yet it's somehow held above actual tests in reality, like the proof of evolution over creationism. So this goes back to the second to last. So it's confirmation bias. So this has to do with the tendency to search for, interpret, focus, and only remember information in a way that confirms one's preconceptions. And this also would have to do with one's presuppositions. Presupposition one has, say for the confirmation bias, it's going back to the beginning, would be like the authority bias, like the presupposition, the belief that we have that, say, a parent knows things. And so because we have a presupposition they know things, that everything that's told, we always add the presupposition, a parent told me, thus they might know things. Of course, as a teenager, most teenagers believe parents don't know anything. But I'm just saying, so it's understanding that these things come with other ideas. And so there's a lot going on in hereditary religion. A lot of things are connecting to biases or utilizing biases or promotion of biases. And so, like I said, then it comes to me the one that's the result of. In other words, the other biases, in a sense, are interactive in the hereditary religion, whether promoted or just interacting with the individual. This is one that generally, the last one, is one that happens after the training, in a sense, after the indoctrination. Can happen also during the indoctrination, but I'm just saying it's more common to be evident after. And that is the post-purchase rationalization. This is the tendency to perceive oneself or through rational arguments that one's purchases were good and that they have a good value and they have a truth or a reality value. So this means like the things that purchase, like as in ideas, is what I'm referring to in this context. That they originally had been given the anchoring idea that there must be a God, that reality in some way has to involve supernatural, has to involve magic. So, but after they've been given this with no evidence and accepted it because of probably an authority position, or they wanted to fit in, like I said, the status quo bias, fortified, of course, with the confirmation bias that they're going to prove their own things had to be true because it was given to them by what they thought was true people, or true sources, whether it be family or a book or a large group like a faith organization. But because they do this, like I said, it involves that at some point they need to justify why it had to have been true. This, because it's like, in other words, you're raised till say 20 or something, and someone decides, oh, I'm gonna think about my religion. Well, even if you thought about it at 20, in a sense, if you've been raised since you were, born to be a Muslim, you're going to have a confirmation bias to prove that your Muslim faith is true because you've believed it for so long. And then you have the post-purchase rationalization. You do not want to think you just spent 20 years of your life, believing something incorrect. And so you'll have a tendency to want to think that it must have been a rational argument, or you have to have good reason to, and that your ideas that were given at first had good value, when they may not. They may have no value at all. So anyways, I'll go ahead and wrap it up. Thank you. And